So the other thing, the last point about that article that I thought was cool, that, and this is sort of my transition over to, so Whiskey, Wealth, and Freedom show, right? So we've spent some time talking about whiskey, and we're kind of transitioning into the wealth part of the conversation. Part of the way the article concludes is Willie's approach is deliberately practical. Staying in business comes first, and growth follows only for businesses that manage cash carefully. And I thought that was very apropos from the standpoint that the question, I guess, that I want to throw out to the table. So when you think about cash position, where liquidity equals survival and cash flow is the oxygen that actually allows that survival to occur, how, from a table's perspective, how does liquidity create optionality, and what makes liquidity powerful?
So this is liquidity, right?
That's good.
I barely got my GED.
Could you restate that one more time?
Yeah, just how does liquidity create liquidity, as far as cash goes, create optionality, is the ability to be flexible, nimble, have choice, not be constrained. What makes liquidity more powerful than when it comes to, or what makes it powerful when it comes to survival from a business perspective? Could be kind of an obvious question, but
I mean, you have to have some liquidity from a business perspective. And I would say, for the sake of our discussion, to be nimble, you have to be able to jump on opportunities. And if you're not able to do that, then you're going to miss the main thing that, the main benefit of being small and nimble versus one of the big guys who can pound out the volume.
From my perspective, as far as the housing, real estate, how real estate is financed, that world, it's interesting to me because as I'm looking at how people handle their money, they tend to silo it. And to me, that's the worst thing you can do. I mean, you're never actually siloing money because money's always in flow somewhere. So unless you have stuck it under your mattress. Other than that, that's the only way it's actually taken out of flow. Just because you've locked it off from yourself doesn't mean somebody else isn't using your money to do something. And so the more we can flow money and keep control, liquidity, use, and control, right? Get a clue. That is where we can start looking at things differently. And so people tend to, especially when they're talking about financing real estate, whatever that looks like, whether it's their home or investment property or whatever, they really tend to silo that. And that's just, I did this was the right move at the time. I set it up, I'm done, and I never look at it again unless suddenly I get some offer and then I'm like, oh, well, I'm chasing cash flow without ever looking big picture of what it's actually doing, resetting the schedule, etc. And so to me, it's really fun to sit down with people and truly look at how they're cash flowing, truly look at how money is coming into their lives and what their needs are and what their expenses are, and come up with ways that they can use velocity and actually have their money continually work for them in different ways. So that's always fun.
Reoccurring income.
Yep.
Or whatever the other catchphrase or word for that. I forget what it's called, but that's always good.
Yep.
Yeah. So if liquidity's survival and cash flow is the oxygen that you mentioned, Karen, with the cash flow, so what happens when you understand cash flow instead of just focusing on interest rates? Because we live in such an interest rate sensitive environment, probably always will. How does active cash flow management change the way someone relates to their mortgage?
That's one of the things we always say is it's so important to look at your actual, pull back the aperture, look at how everything is. Again, when we are if you own a home, if you own any kind of real estate, it falls on both sides of the balance sheet. So the balance sheet should really be looked at as three-sided. There's real estate, there's assets and liabilities, and how they all work together flows. And that liquidity of being able to everybody gets so hyper-focused anytime they're looking at any kind of financing thing on rate, but it's only one part of the equation. and they get hyper focused
Yeah.
on it in a way that they often hurt themselves chasing something like that. And again, then locking out money and is that the right decision? And so really being intentional, which is what we've talked about from the beginning, right? You're more likely to live in the way you want to be if you were intentional about how you were actually living, instead of just going along with your conveniences and
Right.
doing whatever everybody, do this and do that and lock it all up there. And I don't know, I'm just doing what everybody told me instead of actually. And I think that's cool about the special forces. Obviously, like we said, those are the ones that have to ultimately have like self-thought and the little bit of the freedom to actually do what you know is best in the time versus just do this, do that, whatever it happens to be,
100%.
When-
There's just, not to interrupt, but
No.
that just reminded me. There's the Ranger Regiment, the Ranger battalions. Their motto is "Sua Sponte," and that means of their own accord. So the meaning behind that is you've got a mission to do, and maybe there's 10 of us or there's 100 of us, but we have to complete this mission. And if you're the last guy, everybody's dead. Guess what? Sua Sponte, of your own accord. Get it done. And that can translate into other things that come up. And, as Rangers, we'd kind of play around with that sometimes, or you'd do something dumb or stupid or something kind of out of place, and you'd be like, "Sua Sponte, Sergeant." I was like, no, that doesn't apply here, dude. But it was basically, don't just do what you're told, and your gut and everything's going to tell you the right thing to do and what you're supposed to do. So get it done, whether somebody's having to tell you or force you to do it. You're the last guy. Get it done.
Well, small units, big impacts. You know
I
what
was
that
just thinking the same
that
thing.
that thing about, like, ultimately you are your own decision maker, and if you quit, the number of people who've abdicated that and just given it up to whatever it happens to be, their employer's person just telling them to do this or all of these different things. Quit abdicating your own freedom to choose how you want to live, and ultimately you're going to be better off if you are the person who actually says, no, I want to be the one who makes my own decisions about my thing. And ultimately that's what gives you the nimbleness to be able to overcome things and adapt, because you aren't just following the lemmings off the ledge.
Yeah.
Yeah, don't be a follower of the herd. When everybody else is retreating, you're the guy going in. To take it back to the Devil's Brigade, they went places where nobody else would go. I think that really to be countercultural, to go against the flow, you have to be willing to think bigger. And I think that this brigade understood, and all the modern special forces understand, that it's bigger than them. It's something that's much bigger than an individual. And I would say that nothing great can be accomplished in one lifetime. I would say when you're talking wealth and influence, it takes a multi-generational vision. Our founding fathers didn't just appear one day out of the blue.
All right.
There were a lot of things that went into the men that were raised to become the founders of this country. And if we want to have a difference, I think we need to think multi-generational. We need to think about how our influence affects more than just us, and how our decisions, whether it's cash flow or whatever, how that trickles out. I mean, you can look at examples throughout history, the Addams family being one, on how one family was able to massively influence politically and economically the future of a nation.
You're talking about John Adams.
Yep.
And-
Yep.
John Quincy Adams.
Yeah.
Yep.
All right.
Not the Adams family.
That's
Like the
that's
legit, the OG Adams
Right,
family.
right. That's
Samuel Adams, all those guys. I mean,
Oh, yeah.
they
You know what's
Who
sad?
was a
though?
great
Well,
brewer?
hold on. But you know what's sad is you actually do have to specify that, right? Because there's a lot of
People
people
start
that might be
picturing
watching this
Morticia.
and they're thinking of the Adams Family, like the show,
Start
like,
singing
the
right,
song.
whatever that is. So, and I'm sorry, Michael, I just interrupted you. But
No,
'cause
no,
you were
it's valid.
Yeah, it was good.
Some families have a disproportional influence on culture and history, and I
Yep.
think it's because of the way their mindset is, the way they think about money, about family, about culture, about everything. Benjamin Franklin is another one. I mean, obviously, the financial side is not my area of expertise, but I love history. And I was just reading the other day that one of the trusts that he set up in his will lasted over 100 years and influenced. It started the Franklin Institute of Technology. It bought a waterworks system for, I believe, Boston or Philadelphia. But those two were both beneficiaries in this trust. But also throughout that trust, he helped hundreds of young tradesmen be able to establish a trade. So for a relatively small investment for the time, he had a huge impact by understanding how money works and by understanding cash flow. And I think that's pretty cool.
Well, one of the first places to me that people can take agency is knowledge. I mean, my gosh, in this day and age, it's so easy. You know, look, I love movies. I do love TV and certain shows and stuff like that. But ultimately, I love to learn. And so any time that you have a chance where you can, and that's why I ended up in the industry, as I would sit there and be like, there needs to be a better way to have conversations with people because, again, they're financing their what is going to be their largest asset with their largest liability for a while. But they have to understand. I want them to understand how all this works together, which is why I joined National Institute of Financial Education, and stay committed to that enough that I am on a call with our mastermind group at least once a week, and I'm always trying to put out content to help people actually understand, because the amount of financial literacy in this country, as far as just for most people, is really quite pathetic.
Yeah.
And if you don't know, how can you ever possibly do better, right? I did the best I could until I knew better, and now I do better.
And what the worst is having knowledge and not applying it.
Yeah.
Right. Because
okay.
knowledge is only potential power.
Right.
It's not until
You've
you put
got
it
to
into
execute.
action.
You've got to act on what you know.
Yeah.
Well, and the reason why I asked you guys the question a little bit ago about, do you think, if the Devil's Brigade never existed previously and we had to recreate it or start it today, could we, based on what we have to work with from a population standpoint? And I asked that for a very kind of stated purpose or reason, and that's because it's very difficult or frustrating for us when we, with the world that we live in, and we see people get so easily tempted by the rocket mortgages of the world and things where all of a sudden, like, it's just, it seems to be very, and it goes back to the whole icebreaker question, safety versus convenience. When people start to abdicate personal responsibility just for the sake of things becoming more convenient or easier, or there is not really a desire to want to take ownership over your own situation, but you want to let somebody else basically kind of save the day for you rather than doing it yourself. Like, that's, to me, why I tried to make a concerted effort to pull all this together, because I feel like that, Willie, what you're talking about with sort of what went into the ability for Devil's Brigade to even exist in the first place and have any kind of success as a small unit with big impact. Asymmetrical advantage and asymmetrical impact required a very minority select group of people that operated with elite high standards that isn't normal. And we see this on a regular basis in the world that we live in. And I know that's why I made a point of bringing up in that article about with the craft distillery industry, because the craft distillers that are able to navigate the environment of today are the ones that are applying, the discipline, the critical thinking, the same kind of fortitude and the same kind of character and grit that you can apply in a lot of different arenas. So trying to pull everything together in a coherent thought process can be a little challenging or disjointed if not done well. But that's the whole reason why I wanted to go the direction I went in with this conversation, was to help try to connect those dots, because I think it's important. And